This is a 3D motion analysis capture from JH Sports for FrederikGauthier. This is a test that we did with Frederik on July 17th, a skating analysis. First, just to start, what we're looking at is Frederik's skating from his first three strides from a biomechanical standpoint. One of the first things that we were measuring is torso rotation. The relationship between the hips and the shoulders, also referred to as counter torque. So what we're looking at is as the player begins to stride, what we're looking for as the torso moves one direction, we need the pelvis moving the opposite direction. We're not talking about extreme range of motion, but if we have that pattern established that the athlete can move the upper torso one direction, lower torso the other direction, we start to create a stretch, shortened pattern with the core. An extremely important part of the skating process, because this allows the athlete to utilize that core as a speed component, as well as it allows us to be able to control the lower body, especially the pelvis, which allows us to be able to assist in the recovery of the leg getting back underneath us. Also helps us to be able to control the hips during the skating stride. So what we're looking at as Frederik's first couple strides is as he takes off, we have the first initial push. Now the left is the first stride. We have the stride on the right side, and then left. And as we're looking at that from the data standpoint, is the red line is the hip segment. So we have the hips counter-torquing right, which goes through over here, 23 degrees of range of motion on one side. Back up, going through 23 degrees range of motion, on the other side. So overall, we want the hips to go through the same range of motion as far as counter torquing in degrees from the left and the right, which Frederik does a great job of doing. Now, however, when we do look at the opposite side, or the opposite part of the counter torquing with the shoulders, which is the blue line, is we see 33 degrees of range of motion one direction, and only 23 degrees of range of motion on the other side. So he's definitely over-rotating one direction compared to the other, which is definitely it's a small issue, but definitely something that contributes to a little bit of power and control lost. However, we do have what we're looking for is a symmetrical pattern to, as one goes one direction, the other goes the opposite direction. The pattern is actually pretty good. However, he does go through a slightly bigger range of motion on the right side compared to the left side. And the second thing that we're going to take a look at is the hip. And what we're measuring with the hip is the first initial push-off, which is indicated right here. Okay. And the first initial and the speed values over here on the left-hand side. So the overall speed values of the first initial push around 300, which is pretty good degrees per second. Now first stride peaks out at about 4. This is the left hip here, the blue line, which peaks out at 416. Second stride with the right hip goes to 415. So overall speed is fantastic. How we're looking at this is if this is the athlete here, as the athlete first makes contact with the ice in the first push, first official stride, this is what we refer to as heel strike, which is indicated at this line right here. When the leg then gets to what we call mid stance, which is indicated by this line here, and then when we get to toe off, which is indicated by this line right here. We look at it from a biomechanical standpoint, where we're looking for our athletes to reach maximum hip extension speed right in between mid-stance and toe-off, right in this area. When an athlete's able to do that, they're able to maximize the ability to force, the force that they can create into the ice to propel themselves forward. What often happens if a lot of athletes get their max hip extension speed happening close to mid-stance, which then creates too much force going upwards, which robs them of speed and power, or they stay into their maximum hip speed happens way too close to the toe off, which again robs them of speed and power and also makes it very difficult for that leg to get back underneath them as they go to stride. So as they go to push, excuse me. So what we're looking at as Frederik is this. We're first going to look at the left hip flexion extension. So first initial stride, we got a good hip load right through mid stance and good extension speed, but we have that extension speed happening just a little bit too close to toe off. What we're looking for is that hip extension speed to happen just a little bit closer to mid stance so that we don't stay in extension quite so long. So the left side pattern is really good. We just reach max speed just a little bit too close to toe off. Now looking at the right side is we don't see that same good hip load here that we see on the other side, but again, we're looking for him to reach that peak speed a little bit closer to mid stance. Here's the second stride, mid stance and toe off, where he has that maximum speed happening just a little bit closer to toe off. So definitely nitpicking him here, but again, all of this is going to rob him with potential speed that he can already create that he's not being able to utilize. So the extension, looking at purely the extension, the speeds and everything are great, and the pattern's pretty good. Not quite as much load on the right side as we have on the left side, and just staying, reaching max hip extension speed just a little bit too late in that gait cycle. Now looking at the knee extension speeds in the same context as first initial speed timing, great, great initial knee speed. And this is going over overall speeds of almost in the excess of 350 to 400, definitely some of the highest knee extension speeds that we've tested. So overall pattern of the left side here is loading, which is great, and then extending, but again, max speed happening just a little bit too close to toe off. So we'd like to see that pattern extend just a little bit closer to mid stance and toe off. What that allows him to do again is to create a little bit more speed and power to move forward, but not stay in extension quite as long. Now the right side, same thing, good load here, but again happening that peak speed happening just a little bit too close to toe off. We'd like to see it happen more in mid stance, which just allow him to not stay in extension for quite a long longer period of time. So looking at it from the actual video standpoint, when we look at Frederik's skating, so there's the first initial push. Now here's the first initial stride on the left. So as he starts to move forward, we're looking for that extension speed to happen mid-stance, a little bit here, but there's toe off. So as Frederik starts to push, and again, a lot of this would have to do with the fact that he's just a big kid. If we want that to happen, again, just a little bit earlier in the gait, as Frederik starts to push there, you can almost see visually how that push is happening just slightly too late. So the maximum push is happening back here as opposed to happening just a little bit earlier in that process. And just have that happening a little bit earlier is just going to now allow him to, the speed that he has, it's going to be able to create even more power. So if we look at again right there, you see that last push just happening a little bit too late in that gait. And that is the same thing that we're seeing in his data of that knee extension speed happening just a little bit too late in here in that cycle. So overall pretty good. We just want to get the hip and knee timing just to happen just a little bit closer to mid stance, so that he just doesn't stay in extension for too long. Next thing we're going to look at is just the overall gross range of motion between the left hip and the right hip. right hip being in the red, left hip being in the blue. So one of the things that stands out is it's pretty symmetrical. We're looking at the overall symmetry of the range of motion of the pelvis, where you see just slightly the left hip is going through just a little bit bigger range of motion than what the right hip is going through. So definitely something to keep an eye on when we start his working with his training program. Now, when we look at the knee in the same context, gross range of motion, we actually see something slightly similar, only we have the range of motion of the right knee compared to the left, that we now see that the left knee actually goes through a slightly smaller range of motion than what the right does. So the hip going through a little bit too big a range of motion is now causing the knee actually to go through a slightly smaller range of motion, which can also affect the timing of that extension speed, especially on the left side, which was his first initial push. So definitely something, an indicator to take a look at as we start Frederik's training program, just to see if we see those same patterns in lunging patterns, push-pull patterns in the gym, where we can again address that and begin to train some of these things off the ice to bring his attention. And then hopefully this information too can definitely help Barb as just as an indicator of looking at some of these same patterns as she sees it from a technical standpoint, to again be able to help Frederik continue to improve. So overall, as a brief summary, some fantastic stuff. The speed outputs and everything are great. The counter torquing, he goes through a slightly bigger range of motion on one side with his upper torso, which is definitely not uncommon due to players holding on to the way they hold on to a stick with a split grip. So something to look at in the counter torquing pattern. Hip and knee extension speeds are fantastic. The timing of them is happening a little bit late in the overall gait. So speed outputs happening a little bit too close to toe off. And then just gross range of motion, that's looking at the left hip goes through a little bit bigger range of motion than the right hip, and then left knee going through a smaller range of motion than the right hip. So just looking at a pattern like that, that can definitely, one of those small things can definitely rob him just of a little bit of timing as he's skating. So overall, some great things, and this analysis is designed to give his skating instructor a little bit of information that can help her on the ice, as well as gives us an indication of some small things that he's doing that we can look for in an off-ice coordination program, not strength, coordination, to see if we can do some things in push-pull patterns, extension patterns, to see if we can get that timing happening just a little bit closer to mid-stance. And again, looking at making sure the symmetry between the left hip and right hip, left knee and right knee are very symmetrical to give him the best possibility, or the best chance to be able to create maximum amount of speed in the best patterns possible.